An old man was left to die in the snow, but what this dog did will break your heart. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. A shiny black car, cold despite its gleam, pulled over on the shoulder of a rural road. From the back seat, an elderly man with a pale face and a neatly trimmed white beard struggled to get out. He wore an old coat, too thin for the winter, and his trembling hands gripped a worn wooden cane. "Matthew?" he asked in a frail voice. "Where are we? I don't recognize this road." The driver, a man in his 40s with a strong jaw and an impatient look, avoided answering. He quickly walked over to the old man, took his arm with a firmness he tried to hide, and led him to the edge of a snowy forest. "Dad, stay here for a moment, okay? I'm going to get help. Just wait. Help? Why help? I don't understand. Matthew, what's going on?" the old man said, his voice breaking, his eyes unfocused. "I'll explain later. Just stay still." The old man, blind for 15 years, nodded with fear, trusting his only son's voice. His heart pounded. Something wasn't right. He felt the wind, the absence of human sounds, and he felt alone. The car started with a brief roar and drove off down the road, leaving only the sound of tires fading into the distance. "Matthew?" the old man said, his voice now trembling. "Matthew?" There was no answer. The silence of the snow enveloped him. The wind grew stronger. Snowflakes fell on his face. He turned his head, directionless, and began taking short, clumsy steps, sinking into the snow. "I can't see. I don't know where to go." A tear rolled down his frozen cheek. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly forgotten. In the distance, an owl hooted, and Joseph, his name was Joseph Carter, once a conductor, now a widower, alone in the world, sat at the base of a tree. His body was already shivering. God, is this the end? His fingers were purple from the cold. His cane fell from his hands. He closed his eyes, giving in. He didn't know that at that very moment, many miles away, a special soul was already sensing him. In a nearby town, the patrol car moved slowly through icy streets. Christmas lights still hung from porches, but the mood was grim. Inside the vehicle, Officer James Turner, 30 years old, fair skin with a slight tan, short black hair, a strong jaw, and determined eyes, held the steering wheel with one hand while gently petting his loyal partner, Thunder, with the other. Thunder was an impressive German shepherd. His black and tan fur shone under the dashboard lights. His muscular frame, sharp gaze, and alert posture made him a natural sentinel. Every move he made was precise, but that night, something had him restless. "What's wrong, boy?" James asked, noticing Thunder's heavy breathing and his fixed stare out the window, ears perked. Thunder let out a soft whimper. His eyes were locked on the darkness outside, as if he could see something James couldn't. James frowned. This wasn't normal. Thunder was a trained, disciplined dog, but he had a sixth sense that officers learned to trust. The patrol radio buzzed with routine chatter, nothing unusual, but Thunder stayed restless. He suddenly stood, planting his front paws on the dashboard, whimpering loudly. James stopped the car. "Thunder, what do you feel?" The dog looked straight into his eyes. No words were needed. James understood instantly. Someone needed help. It wasn't a command. It was a cry from the soul. "Damn," James muttered, opening the door. "Let's go." In seconds, Thunder was sprinting through the snow. He didn't hesitate or waver. His strong body cut through the streets, leaving trails in the ice. James followed on foot, worried but with his heart racing. He knew when Thunder acted like this, something serious was happening. They ran through alleys, past an abandoned industrial area, and crossed a frost-covered wooden bridge. Thunder didn't stop. His breath formed clouds in the freezing air, but his energy seemed endless. After several minutes, he stopped abruptly. His ears twitched, as if hearing something James couldn't. He looked north, toward the snow-covered hills and forest. His paws scraped the snow, impatient. "There?" James asked, scanning the horizon. "But there's nothing out there, just mountains and trees." Thunder let out a soft growl. He took a step toward the hills, then another. James understood. "All right, let's go." They didn't know that, just a few miles away, a blind old man shivered, lost in the snow, and that his hope in the form of a four-legged angel was already on its way. Night had fully settled over the forest. No cars, no human voices, only the constant wail of the wind weaving through tall, bare trees. Joseph was curled up at the base of a frost-covered pine. His purple lips barely moved, murmuring fragments of a melody, like a faint echo of his past as a conductor. "My E-flat violins, softer, softer." His mind was slipping. The cold seeped into him like a silent poison. His fingers no longer responded. His blindness wasn't the hardest part now. It was the loneliness, a silent presence wrapping him like a white shroud. At some point he had tried to walk, but his legs wouldn't obey. He had fallen twice in the snow. His cane was buried a few yards back, invisible to him. In his heart, one question beat like a faint drum. Why had his own son left him here? "Matthew, how could you?" A distant howl broke the silence. Joseph furrowed his brow with effort. He wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. His hearing was still sharp, but the sound came and went like a dream floating through the snowfall. The blizzard grew stronger. Tiny snowflakes stung his face. His whole body shook. His thoughts were no longer clear. He saw his late wife, Ellen, in the shadows, felt the applause from his last concert. Reality blurred with hazy memories. "Ellen, my love, did you come for me?" Then, a crunch of branches. A presence. Something large was approaching through the snow. It wasn't a hallucination, it was real. Thunder. The police dog emerged from the trees like a living shadow. His breath was heavy, but his steps were steady. He didn't bark. He didn't hesitate. He ran to the old man's body and sniffed him quickly. Joseph felt warmth on his chest. He startled at first, but couldn't move. Who's there?" Thunder curled up beside him, wrapping his warm body around the old man. He licked his face gently. His paws pushed the snow aside to get closer, to shield him. Then he let out a long, powerful howl full of urgency, aimed at the sky. It was as if the entire mountain heard his call. Joseph barely managed to touch the warm fur with his trembling hand. "An angel." Thunder didn't answer. He just protected him. He just waited. And as the wind howled and the forest stayed silent, a quiet miracle was beginning to unfold. Thunder's howl still lingered in the icy air, echoing through the trees like a desperate prayer. James, who had followed his partner's tracks to the base of the hill, heard it, and his heart skipped a beat. "Thunder!" he shouted, quickening his pace as the snow reached his knees. "Where are you, boy?" His flashlight trembled in his hand. His breath came out in anxious bursts of vapor. He pushed through fallen branches, slipped once but didn't stop. Thunder was guiding him. He always did. James reached a narrow clearing, and there he saw it. A human figure lying in the snow, wrapped in the imposing silhouette of his dog. Thunder raised his head and wagged his tail when he saw James, but he didn't move away. James ran to them, dropped to his knees in the snow, and set his flashlight down to free both hands. "Good Lord," he whispered, seeing the old man's condition. Joseph's face was pale as ice. His lips were cracked, his eyelids gently closed, and his hands stiff on his chest. But he was still breathing, faintly. "He's alive," James whispered, relief washing over his face. "Hold on, sir, I'm here." He grabbed his radio quickly. "This is Officer Turner. I need an ambulance in the northern sector of the Cedar Hills area. Elderly man, unconscious from hypothermia. Urgent?" As he spoke, he draped his jacket over Joseph's body and rubbed his arms firmly, trying to bring back warmth. Thunder stayed close, as if he knew he was still needed. "It's okay, old man. The worst is over," James said softly, looking at the sleeping man's face. Joseph, lost in dreams, mumbled something barely audible. "Ellen." James raised his eyebrows. He didn't know who she was, but the word broke his heart. It was the echo of an old love that refused to die. Minutes later, ambulance lights pierced the horizon. 2 paramedics rushed down the hill and James guided them to the clearing. The scene struck them deeply. "Who found him?" one asked, wrapping the old man in thermal blankets. "Him," James replied, pointing to Thunder. The paramedic looked at the dog in awe. "Not the first time I've heard something like this, but it always amazes me. That dog saved a life." Thunder tilted his head. His eyes stayed on Joseph, as if waiting for a sign he could finally relax. As they placed the old man on the stretcher, Thunder tried to climb aboard. James gently held him back. "You'll see him later, buddy. I promise." Thunder lowered his ears, resigned, but his eyes never left Joseph as they carried him away. The bond was already formed, and neither time nor death could break it. The county hospital had an old but warm feel. Soft hallway lights contrasted with the clinical white walls. In room 207, Joseph lay under thick blankets. His skin, still pale, had regained some color. A small nasal oxygen tube helped him breathe more steadily. His eyes remained closed, but his eyelids twitched slightly. In a corner, sitting quietly, was James. He had decided not to leave him alone. Since finding him in the snow, something in his heart told him this man needed more than medical care. He needed justice, and someone who believed in him. The door opened carefully. A woman with blonde hair and a kind face entered, holding a clipboard. It was the head nurse, Laura Bennett. "Detective Turner," she said softly. The patient started murmuring names in his sleep. "He says Matthew a lot, and Ellen too. Do you know if he has family?" James shook his head slowly. "No, but I think his family isn't part of his salvation, but his tragedy." Laura nodded, understanding. She left the papers on the table and slipped out quietly. Minutes later, James's phone buzzed. Answering it, he heard a male voice, arrogant and sharp. "Are you the officer who found my father?" James sat up straight. "Who's this?" "Matthew Carter. I'm Joseph Carter's son. They told me he's in the hospital. I came because, well, I didn't have much choice." "Funny," James said coldly. He nearly froze to death. Alone, in the woods, abandoned like a sick dog. And you're only showing up now. An awkward silence filled the line. "Look, officer, this isn't your business. My father has mental issues. He gets confused. He might have wandered off alone. We can't control that." James clenched his jaw. He stood from the chair and looked at the sleeping old man. "You can come to the hospital, Mr. Carter, but I'm warning you, I'm not just a cop, I'm a witness. And I have a dog who tracked him by instinct. He didn't wander off, he was left there." Matthew didn't respond, he just hung up. Hours later, a tall man with slicked-back blonde hair and cold blue eyes walked through the hospital door. He wore expensive clothes and moved with confidence. He looked more like a lawyer than a worried son. When he entered the room and saw his father, his lips curled in a barely noticeable grimace of annoyance. "What kind of show are you putting on now, old man?" But he wasn't alone. James was waiting, and beside him, sitting tall with a steady gaze, was Thunder. The dog stood slowly. He walked to Matthew, sniffed him, and let out a soft growl. It wasn't aggression, it was recognition. James crossed his arms. "He remembers you. He was in your car. He knows who you are." Matthew tried to stay calm, but his eyes betrayed him. "You're accusing me based on a dog? I'm saying you left your father to die, and now we're going to find out why." Thunder returned to James's side. His eyes never left Matthew. The air grew tense, heavy, as if something much darker was about to come to light. The next day's sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting golden light on the white walls of room 207. Joseph was still sleeping, but his breathing was steadier. His cheeks, once sunken from the cold, were slowly regaining life. Thunder hadn't moved from his side. He slept sitting by the bed, like an ancient guardian who needed no rest. James, still in his uniform, reviewed papers and records in the next room. Something didn't add up. Too many inconsistencies. Joseph's supposed wandering off lined up perfectly with a withdrawal from a joint bank account, and that withdrawal was made by Matthew Carter just hours before the abandonment. "Coward," James muttered, grabbing a folder and heading back to the room. When he entered, he found Joseph with his eyes half open. For the first time, those gray, blind eyes seemed full of presence. "Where?" the old man whispered. "Amsa's alive." James stepped closer, a soft smile on his lips. "Yes, Mr. Carter, you're safe. We found you just in time, thanks to him," he said, pointing to Thunder. The dog raised his head at his name and approached cautiously. Joseph reached out slowly and stroked the thick fur, as if recognizing the touch by instinct. "A dog," he said in a hoarse voice. "A dog saved me. A dog. And something more. It was like he knew exactly where to find you." Joseph closed his eyes for a moment, holding back emotion. His lips trembled, but not from the cold. "I thought I'd die out there, alone, like a burden." "You're not, and you're not alone," James said firmly. "Mr. Carter, I need to ask you some questions, but only if you feel strong enough." Joseph nodded weakly. "My son, does he know I'm here?" "Yes, he came last night. Didn't show much concern, but we saw him." Thunder did too. The old man took a deep breath. A tear slipped from his left eye. He wasn't always like this. Matthew was a sweet boy, but money, power, they swallowed him. Did he take you to the woods? Joseph hesitated, as if reliving it hurt more than the cold that nearly killed him. He said he'd take me to a care home, that it'd be better for me, with support, but we stopped in the middle of nowhere. He made me get out, said he'd go for help. He never came back. James wrote down every word, his heart burning with quiet anger. I understand, and we'll take action. He'll be investigated, Mr. Carter, but I need your full statement. Can you do that? Yes. For me, and for all the old folks discarded like trash. At that moment, Thunder rested his head on Joseph's lap. The old man smiled, touching the dog's back. I never thought my final days would be saved by a four-legged angel. The hospital's small cafeteria was nearly empty. Outside, snow fell with the same heavy slowness that had marked recent days. Sitting over a cup of cold coffee, James reviewed reports with a furrowed brow. He'd spoken with the county prosecutor that morning. There was enough evidence to open a formal investigation against Matthew Carter for abandonment and attempted homicide, aggravated by their family ties. Yet something inside him didn't feel satisfied. It wasn't just about laws. It was deeper, more human, and maybe uglier. James looked up as Laura Bennett, the nurse, approached with a small cardboard box. Detective, we found this among Mr. Carter's belongings. It was in his coat inside a plastic bag. She opened it on the table. Inside was a yellowed music score notebook and a black and white photo of a young woman with kind eyes and a sad smile. On the back, faded ink read, Ellen, my reason for living. His wife, James whispered. Laura nodded. He says he lost her over 10 years ago. That since then, no one really listened to him anymore. James took the notebook in his hands. The first pages were filled with musical notes, but there were also handwritten phrases. Don't let me be forgotten. Let someone remember me as I was. I'm not an old piece of furniture. There's still music in my soul. He felt a lump in his throat. Thunder, who had followed him like a shadow since that night, whimpered softly at his side, as if he understood every unspoken word. Where's Matthew now? James asked, snapping back to reality. In the waiting room, with a lawyer. So, of course, James said with sarcasm. First he tries to bury him in snow, now he wants to bury him in paperwork. Minutes later, he entered the room where Matthew, impatient, reviewed documents with a man in a grey suit. Seeing James, he stood. Officer Turner, I'm willing to cooperate, within legal bounds. Legal? James shot back sharply. You want to talk about legality? You emptied your father's accounts, drove him to an isolated forest, and left him to die. What kind of law defends that? The lawyer tried to step in, but James raised a hand firm. I'm not done. We have testimony, physical evidence, bank transactions, and even the nose of a witness who never gets it wrong. Thunder entered at that moment, stopping right in front of Matthew and stared. That look wasn't a threat. It was judgment. Matthew looked away. For the first time, his facade began to crack. He always made me feel small, he said, almost in a whisper. He was always the maestro, the admired one. I never had room to be me. That doesn't justify what you did, James replied. And now you'll face the consequences. The lawyer stayed silent. Matthew sank into the chair, defeated. He said nothing more. Joseph's room now had flowers on the windowsill. An old radio played classical music softly. The old man, dressed in a clean robe with his hair combed back, sat by the window with a blanket over his legs. Though he couldn't see the view, he listened to the crunch of melting snow, the song of a lone sparrow on a nearby branch, and he breathed with peace. How's the maestro doing today? James asked, entering with a warm smile and a folder under his arm. Joseph turned his face toward him. His expression had changed, no more stiffness or fear. There was calm. I still don't understand why I'm here, but I'm starting to be grateful. Thunder walked behind the officer and went straight to Joseph. As he did every morning, he rested his head on the old man's lap. Joseph laughed softly, stroking the dog's warm back. Every day I wake up and feel this fur. It's like the universe is telling me, it's not your time yet. Maybe it isn't. Maybe you've still got a lot to do, James replied, sitting across from him. Listen, Mr. Carter, the prosecutor's going to file charges against your son, but before that happens, there's something else you should know. He pulled documents from the folder and placed them on the table. A local community music foundation wants you to visit. They say they still have some of your arrangements. They think you could help the neighborhood kids start a small orchestra." Joseph went silent. Tears welled up slowly, quietly, falling down his weathered cheeks. "After everything I've been through, there's still a place for me?" "There always was," James answered. "The world just forgets those who don't make noise sometimes." "And sometimes," Joseph added, his voice trembling, "God sends a dog to remind us." That afternoon, a humble community center's hall welcomed a special guest. Youngsters with out-of-tune violins, cellists with more enthusiasm than skill, and kids who barely read sheet music lined up as the old man arrived, accompanied by a cop and an elegant, calm dog. "He was a conductor, right?" A girl with bright eyes whispered to her friend. "Yeah, and they say he almost froze to death, but a dog saved him." "A dog?" "No, an angel," she corrected. Joseph, with a faint smile, took an old baton they offered and stood before the group. He raised his arms slowly. The room fell deeply silent. "From the soul, kids, not from the ego. I want you to play like you're talking to someone who's gone, like this is your last chance to say, 'I miss you.'" The first chord was clumsy, uncertain, but little by little the music found its way. And as he conducted, Joseph was no longer a forgotten old man. He was the same man who once made hearts tremble from a podium. Thunder, sitting in the front row, watched him with the focus of a loyal disciple. Days passed like leaves carried by the wind, but something profound had changed. Joseph Carter's case became the talk of local radio, neighborhood cafes, and even schools where teachers explained the value of compassion to kids. Not because of the scandal, but because of the story behind the miracle. A blind old man, left to his fate in the snow, and a dog who didn't need words to save a life. In the county courthouse, the room was plain and quiet. Matthew Carter stood beside his lawyer. His face, once proud, now seemed dim, as if he could no longer hold up the lie. Across from him, seated with the support of a cane, Joseph held his back straight, his face calm. He wore a light grey coat and a hat that had belonged to his father. At his side, as always, was Thunder. James, also present, watched in silence. Not as a cop, as a witness, as someone who believed in a stranger and now saw him reclaim his dignity. The judge, an older man with silver hair, reviewed the documents carefully. Then he looked at Matthew. "Mr. Carter, the facts here aren't just legal. They're deeply moral. You didn't just abandon your father. You tried to erase his existence. And this court cannot allow that." Matthew swallowed hard but didn't respond. "Based on the evidence and testimony, this court finds you guilty of aggravated abandonment of a vulnerable person and attempted homicide in the 2nd degree." A murmur rippled through the room. "Sentencing will be set in a later hearing, but what's clear today is that not all angels have wings." The judge glanced at Thunder, who had stayed still the whole time. His gesture was subtle but full of respect. Outside, as they left the courthouse, the press waited, but Joseph gave no statements. He only raised a hand and stroked his loyal companion's head. "He already said everything that needed saying," he whispered. That night, back at James's house, where Joseph would stay until finding a permanent home, they shared a simple dinner. Thunder slept by the fireplace, breathing calmly. "I never imagined I'd end up here," Joseph said, sipping hot tea. "After everything, I just wanted someone to listen, not out of pity, out of memory." "And that's what happened," James replied. "The world didn't forget your music, it just needed to hear it again." "You know what's strangest, James?" "What's that?" "When my son left me in that forest, I wasn't afraid of dying. What broke me was thinking no one would know I was there, that I'd fade without witnesses." James lowered his head, touched by the honesty. "But that's not how it went. No, because that dog, that beautiful soul, decided I was worth it." They fell silent. The crackling fire accompanied their talk like a gentle melody. Thunder, without opening his eyes, wagged his tail once. Winter was starting to fade. Trees, bare for months, showed timid buds on their branches. The air was still cold, but no longer heavy in the lungs. It was a different cold, full of promise. In the town's central square, a makeshift stage had been set up. Warm lights hung between wooden posts, and benches were filled with neighbors, kids, elders, and families, with cheeks red from the weather. A simple sign hung behind the stage: Gratitude Concert, Cedar Hills Community Orchestra. Joseph stood at the center of the stage, holding his baton with the care of a violinist cradling their instrument. He wore a navy blue jacket, and though his blindness remained, his face radiated fullness. At his side, Thunder, sitting alert, eyes gleaming under the spotlights, as if he knew this moment belonged to him as much as the old man. The first notes rose. They weren't perfect. There were off-key notes, uneven timing, strings out of tune. But there was soul, and that was enough. The crowd listened in silence. Some closed their eyes, others let memories carry them. This music had something unpracticed, something that came from deep within. As he conducted, Joseph thought of all he'd been through. The snow, the betrayal, the loneliness, and how, when all seemed lost, a creature without words or judgment brought him back to life. "This isn't a concert," he murmured to himself, with a faint smile of understanding. "It's an act of love." When the final note faded, the audience stood. No shouts, no cheers, just a deep, emotional silence, like a shared prayer. A girl with red hair approached the stage, holding a flower. "Mr. Carter, can I give this to your dog?" Joseph smiled. He nodded gently. The girl lowered her head and placed the flower in front of Thunder. The dog didn't move, just tilted his head slightly, as if he understood the gift. Later, as the crowd dispersed and night began to fall, Joseph sat on a bench with James. "I never thought I'd feel peace after everything." "You earned it, Joseph," James said, looking at the darkening sky. "And it wasn't a miracle. It was justice, and a bit of fate. And a dog," the old man added. Thunder at their feet raised an ear. "Not just any dog," James corrected. "A noble soul, a heart with paws." Joseph closed his eyes. He breathed in the clean mountain air. The cold was no longer an enemy. It was an old friend, embracing him gently. The scene pulls back. The image shows the three. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. The old man, the cop, and the dog sitting on a bench under a starry sky. And a final voiceover says, "Even if the world abandons you, a noble soul can find you." Months had passed since that unforgettable concert in Cedar Hills. Spring transformed the landscape. Trees once bare now offered shade and flowers. The streets buzzed with life. But in the hearts of those who knew Joseph and Thunder's story, something deeper had bloomed. The certainty that love and loyalty know no shape or age. Joseph never lived alone again. He was given a small house next to James's property, with a garden facing the forest. Each morning, he walked with Thunder, guided not by sight, but by trust. With every step, townsfolk greeted him like an old friend. He was no longer the forgotten man. He was the maestro. Matthew, his son, was sentenced to alternative punishment with community service and mandatory family therapy. Human justice did its part, but the soul's justice would take time. In a letter he sent his father months later, he wrote, "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I just ask you not to forget me entirely. I learned the hardest cold wasn't outside, but inside me." Joseph replied with few words, without bitterness. "You still have music, don't let it die." Thunder officially retired from police service with honors from the department. He received a Valor Medal and a plaque that read, "For finding what eyes can't see." But for him, the only reward that mattered was sleeping each night at the foot of his new home. James continued his police work, but something in him had changed forever. With Joseph's help, he founded a program called Second Chance, dedicated to rescuing abandoned elders and retired canine dogs, creating shared homes for them. Cedar Hills became a symbol of empathy, not for its laws, but for its actions. One afternoon, as the sun gilded the fields and a breeze carried the scent of damp earth, Joseph sat on his favorite garden bench. Thunder, his muzzle a bit whiter, lay beside him. The old maestro reached out, stroked his strong neck, and smiled. "I don't know how much time I have left, but I've lived long enough to understand one thing. Sometimes angels don't come from the sky. They come running, through the snow." Thunder raised his head and looked straight into his eyes. Though he said no words, the answer was clear. There, among flowers and silence between past and future, the story became eternal, not as a tragedy, but as a testament that it's never too late to be remembered, that it's never too late to love and be loved. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.